Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb, and we're talking about Pioneer today, Brian.
People have spoken.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
A small handful of people. Look, if you want to know the most common feedback I got about last week's show, it was do the Pioneer episode. I want to hear you guys talk about Pioneer. I also got a lot of feedback that people love when we do the deck dumps, which is weird to me because
you can't see the deck list.
Yeah, and we don't phone anything in. You always get our insight, our opinion, but the deck dumps are just taking someone else's stuff, right, and giving our opinion on it. So I guess they're like the reaction video of podcast content.
Oh no! When you put it like that, I hate that show now.
I know, but people love it. So many people are like, these are my favorite episodes. So we're doing it again, back-to-back weeks.
Okay, so the next modern deck dump, or I guess even this one, it could just be Jerry and Brian react to Pioneer metagame. You will not believe, blah, blah, blah. Just kill me now. Get it over.
I'll leave you in charge of the title that week so you can make sure to get maximum clickbait.
I'm just saying, we could do it this week, 4 people said they wanted to hear about Pioneer, but I'm going to be honest. What the hell else should we be talking about?
Don't know. I don't know how I would answer that. Played a few games of Magic here and there. I don't have any insight for you. There is some spot tournaments showing up on Melee that, I don't know, there's no kind of community focus like we said would happen. And if anything, Pioneer is having a brief, it seems to be the thing that the consciousness is turned towards at this moment, only because there's an announcement of potential Pioneer tournaments. I'm so skeptical that any of these are going to happen, but if they do, that's a reason people care about Pioneer. But also, I think just a lot of people do love this format and are upset with the way it's been treated and think maybe we have the possibility to influence that a little bit. So if that's true, I'm happy to lend our podcast time to propping up the Pioneer tournament a little bit.
Well, okay, I'm gonna do my best here to try and do that, right? So, Pioneer, for starters, much cheaper than Modern.
Yes.
Tops out at $400 a deck, and if you have any semblance of Modern cards or just bad standard cards, like a good common, uncommon collection, I think you're pretty well set for Pioneer. You have a lot of the stuff, and you probably won't have to buy too much more. Now, if you're talking about playing on Magic Online, I'm looking at some of the prices for decks, and it's 150 tickets per deck, and the same thing applies, right?
Yeah, very affordable in both paper and online. And I mean, I'm going to take that aspect of it a bit further. This should be the default paper format. Standard as a paper format doesn't need to exist. I'm done with it. I don't think it serves any purpose. I think this should be what the FNMs are built around. What, when you're onboarding as a new player, it should be in the Pioneer space. Not only because I think the non-rotational nature of it is very, very good, but from just a nuts and bolts perspective, this is the purest, best form of Magic being played right now. And it's been like that for a while because I taught my wife how to play Magic about 2 years ago now. I used the Pioneer format because it was by far so much closer to just a real traditional game of Magic. Attacking, blocking, some combo, all the flavors really well represented. There's removal spells, there's back and forth. So just a really, really strong format. I don't know how much of it is timing. Pioneer obviously came along at a really weird time. I don't know how much of it is just bad luck, but this format could have been so much more. Maybe it still can be. Maybe there's still a chance.
Tell you what, I think a lot of it is Wizards not giving a shit.
I will put blame there for sure. For sure. I mean, there's so many things you could have done with this. And, well, we don't need to talk about missed opportunities again because we do that often enough. But there's something here still. Still, if someone wants to seize on it, there is opportunity to do so.
I had a thing happen to me the other day that made me think about a missed opportunity that is probably not super public or whatever. So I'm not going to get into it. But it just made me seething mad for 30 minutes.
Magic related.
Yeah.
Something you wanted to do in the Magic space.
Something like that, sure.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah, it's just like, you want to talk about missed opportunities, man. I'll give you an earful.
We our entire business endeavor has a couple years straight of some missed opportunities rolled into it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, I did play some Magic too. I wrote an article about the Cobblade deck that we talked about last week.
Exciting news. The modern Callblade deck, of
Yeah.
course. And how was it? Give us your review.
The deck or the article or both?
I'll take both, sure.
I think my article went pretty well. I did mention in the article that there were a lot of things that I could have added to it, but I didn't because of length mostly, where, I very easily think that I could have shown a little bit more like personality of the deck and what the deck was about, and maybe put the spotlight on that with like some screenshots, some keeper mull decisions, and it's just cool stuff like that could give you a little bit more of an insight into like, well, this deck should be playing opt instead of Serum Visions or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, playing Magic Online was pretty fun. Got my deck pretty quick and easy from Card Hoarder. Shout out to them if you want a rental service. Note to self, I still have to return the deck because I've had it up for a while. But it was fun, dude. Like the games were fun. The deck is solidly tier 2. 2.5,
Okay.
something like that.
That's not bad for a modern deck, honestly.
It's not, but like the deck was also really well built, and there wasn't a whole lot I wanted to change. And I think some of the choices were like very smart, very like clearly tuned into the metagame and was like trying to solve certain problems. But it was like just some of the problems that decks like this have. Like when you played Cobblade in Standard, Squadron Hawk and Stoneforge Mystic were really good at holding the ground in a lot of instances, and in Modern that's just not really the case. So if your opponent like does two things on a turn where you do one thing or one thing that doesn't matter, and they do that a couple of times, they get super far ahead of you, and you just have no comeback mechanism, right? So that was kind of the problem, and having things like Spell Pierce and Squadron Hawk into Solitude, it did go a long way towards trying to solve some of those issues. So the deck is more viable than I thought it was, actually.
That's cool. That's good news. I just had a thought when you were mentioning comeback mechanisms, and like I hear that phrase and my thoughts immediately go to like sweeper effects. But sweeper effects are not comeback mechanisms anymore because of the ancillary value you get off of every single play you make.
Yes.
That sweeping the battlefield doesn't matter. So what would a comeback effect look like anymore? Are there comeback effects in Magic anymore?
Well, okay, so part of the problem is that you have your things like Prismatic Ending and like Solitude type of stuff, and that helps you survive the early game. And then you have cards like Stoneforge Mystic, which are like pretty slow, are very unlikely to turn things around. Squadron Hawk is certainly that, and exacerbated, it's even worse. But it usually comes down to like a mid game of you being like on, turn 5, you're like, oh, I need to like answer these 3 things or like accomplish some sort of task. And it's not like Supreme Verdict would necessarily save you. It's just like, oh, I need to find like a Prismatic Ending and a Solitude and like a counterspell or something. And it's just like, you have no way to actually do that. Right. It's like, you have to like play Jace, brainstorm, untap with it. And it's just like, come on, it's just not going to happen. Right.
Yeah. So I think a lot about why Magic doesn't hit the same way right now in a lot of formats. And now I want to explore this catch-up mechanism idea a little bit more. It feels like in some ways the way you catch up is you win the game. Like you just steal the initiative and you snowball as opposed to their snowball. Not, oh, I'm going to reset and come back around. So like
Cobblade against Grixis Shadow, for example. I think that a lot of your threats are like pretty meaningless until you get to the late game, and then like the small things start happening where it's like, I have a Squadron Hawk and a Moreland Haunt, so your Ragavan can never connect, right? And like that cuts off like one avenue of attack.
Yep.
But like in the Grixis Death Shadow mirror match, it would be like Expressive Iteration into an Unholy Heat and cast a Death Shadow or something, right? I mean, it's like after you got Croxa and like didn't have any cards in hand or something. Like that is the way that you come back, is just by playing like 3 1-mana spells out of nowhere. Where obviously if you had those on like a turn previous, you probably wouldn't be as far behind as you were. And the Cobblade deck, it doesn't have iteration or anything that's like a quick burst like that, at least for things that matter. And It just means that you're like, wow, I wish I had 9 mana so I could cast like 3 Time Ravelers and bounce 3 things or whatever. And it's like, come on,
right.
you know?
Get that Blood Sun Lotus Field control going, and maybe you can live that dream.
Yeah, but then you're kind of like digging your own grave by starting behind by playing with slow stuff like that. So yeah, it is interesting. I'm sure that I could cobble together like a theory article about that, or at least talk in some degree as to like why Shadow is good, because it both like puts that pressure on people and does have ways to come back from situations like that. Whereas like this deck just doesn't. It's like you're trying to interact 1-for-1 early, and your cards have like a mana added to them compared to your opponents. So you're kind of screwed.
All makes sense to me. Interesting stuff, but not what we're here for ultimately.
Deck dump, Pioneer time. Format is good. I'm going to say that before I start describing these deck lists, and you're just like, well, that doesn't seem fun or that seems silly or whatever. Format is good.
No, I agree. I have said it several times. I think Pioneer is the best format going right now. We're going to see a lot represented here. And, there may be individual decks I don't like, but as far as a picture, I believe we're talking 20 decks in this deck dump. So that's decent participation. It's not something like Modern, but just as we do it, look and see how much is covered, how many different things are going on, and not just like playing different cards, but trying to accomplish the same goals. There's really different game plans here, and it's cool to see.
Yeah. So first up, the King 3603, Yorion companioned Fires of Invention deck with bunch of enchantments. Raven's Warning. Okay, so why is this enchantment based and not Planeswalker based? First of all, so there's Chain to the Rocks, Omen of the Sea, Shark Typhoon, Birth of Meletus, Raven's Warning. I guess like to some degree Yorion. Oh, okay. Transmogrify into Agent of Treachery, some Sweepers, and some Narcits.
Yeah, and it can be Planeswalker based when it needs to out of the sideboard with the Raven's Warning. It still does the Lucas stuff, like granted at a slower pace, but it has access to it. And I don't know. I like this setup more than just the older versions that were just here's this thing, because that was really, really easy to metagame against. It sort of had its pace. You knew when it was going to do its thing. This deck has some curveballs to throw at you. It plays probably the best Planeswalker in the format in Narset. At least that's been my experience. I think it's so critical, both as an offensive and defensive tool. So I'm happy to see that. The 80 card stuff, I mean, with this, it works, right? We know how powerful it is to have access to Yorion on a Fires of Invention turn.
Yes.
We've done it before. And it's kind of shocking that it's still legal in Pioneer. If you had asked me, 2 years ago when this format was being more widely played, does this stuff last? I probably would have leaned towards no. But here it is. And I don't even know if you would define this as like a tier 1 deck, honestly. You see it pop up from time to time, but never dominant really. Maybe brief periods of like discussion of it being the best deck, but it's so hard to tell with Pioneer, right? Because it doesn't really congeal into a shared experience. It's really hard to put your finger on the pulse of what is the best thing to be doing.
Yeah. Also of note, deck has a light splash for Asika's Chariot. So yeah, I guess all the enchantment type of stuff is just feeding into Transmogrify into Agent, which is completely reasonable. I like Fires. Like I didn't like it in Standard, but it has so much better setup tools in Pioneer and plays out so fun because of that, because of like the cards that it has access to, and is also just completely fair.
Much closer to fair, for sure. I mean, it's not so much fair as like, it's obviously doing the exact same thing. It's just everything surrounding it is on pace.
Correct. Fair comparative.
Yeah. Yeah. And the curve of Fires into Asika's Chariot, that's a nice one. And
it's not bad.
Yeah. I'm glad we never had to live through that. But doing it in Pioneer, pretty appealing.
Next up, AFX. This is a weird one. I went through a bunch of decks before the cast, and I kept seeing this Rakdos deck with Graveyard Trespasser, a card that I despise, Bone Crusher Giant, some Blood Tithe Harvesters, Bloodthirsty Adversaries, Chandra Torture Defiant, Sorin the Mirthless. This one goes up to Liliana Death's Majesty, Go Blink Main, which is awesome.
Yep, love that.
Just Rakdos mid-range with like 3-drop creatures, and I just hate it, man.
You can sell me on the idea that Rakdos mid-range makes sense. I am willing to buy that because you have Thoughtseize in the format. You have things like Dreadhorde Arcanist, which incredibly powerful Magic card, somehow not banned here, and really doesn't see a ton of play. spot play. We're going to see Dreadhorde stuff as we go through these lists.
Lacking better 1-drops, for sure.
Well, I mean, like, if Fatal Push and Thoughtseize are really good in the format, then do you need a lot more? Like, you've already covered a lot of ground there in terms of playing a mid-range style of deck. But instead, this deck looking to do, like, 3-mana creatures. And look, I love a Bone Crusher Giant. Incredible card. Still in this format, an incredible card. Blood Tithe Harvester, okay. Like, I believe in this card. It's got a good-sized body. It has immediate impact, I guess, and the fact that it lets you filter right away. So, yeah, I buy it. Then we get to Graveyard Trespasser, and I've never, ever understood this card. I just don't really know what we're doing with it.
I just hate it. It's so mediocre. Like, I think people are playing this as like a Tarmogoyf, and I don't think that it blocks very well.
I don't think it blocks well. I think that people overvalue the ward. Like, individual card loss doesn't matter all that much in most of these decks. There's exceptions to that.
When you're like go blanking people, it's a little bit better, right?
Yeah, for sure. But there's two go blanks here. It's not like you're hard focused on this plan, and I think those two are important.
But you're an attrition deck, so like it does contribute to that plan. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying like it is slightly better in this deck than in other decks.
Here's the problem is, like, if you are an attrition deck, why can't you just play Kroxa? Like, is that really not a better approach for these black-red decks? Is there not a setup you can use with that card that is way more advantageous?
I would say yes. I mean, this deck has 1 Kroxa. Obviously, that is not a ton. I think you could maybe make an argument for, like, Arclight Phoenix being the best deck. Maybe Graveyard Hate is everywhere, so maybe you don't want to, like, lean into Kroxa too much or whatever. But I don't know. Deck also has 2 bloodthirsty adversaries, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think part of this is like people are cognizant of the fact that Phoenix is incredibly good in the format, and we'll talk more about that. And they say, well, here's a threat that also answers Phoenix, but it doesn't answer Phoenix. Like, it really just doesn't matter all that much.
No, what if the Phoenix is already in play, man?
Yep. You have to remove it, time it all right. So I am also off this card, but people love it. I mean, there's huge fans of this card.
I know. So I don't despise this card as much as Castle Vantress, but it's close.
Nice.
And I've tried it. I was like, oh, everyone seems to be playing it. And I
did
like,
too.
This never does anything.
But yeah, I played it in like Jund lists and standard, like Treasure Jund stuff. And I was just like, why am I playing this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially in standard, there's like Briar, whatever, 4/3 that makes you a clue, and Reckless Stormseeker. And it's just like, come on, what are you doing?
Yeah, it was not better than any of those things.
Anyway, next deck, Frank Will 14, Naya Winota. Winota is curving into Tovalar's Huntmaster, and I guess Tovalar Dire Overlord is like not bad either. But yeah, just Naya creatures and chariots.
This deck is so powerful when it does its thing, and it does it ahead of curve with the 4 Elvish Mystic. It has
and Llanowar
acceleration.
Elves.
Yeah, Llanowar Elves, so you get that redundancy. It has the answers because of Brutal Cathar now, where it's able to also control your opponent's battlefield. It's ramping so reliably, so many outs to anything your opponent does. And also, you just get to these points where you're like, oh, everything has kind of gone wrong, but here's a Tovalar's Huntmaster. Can you beat that? And the answer is no so many times. So it really is the perfect threat here because it's incredible to both hit with your Winota and just cast. It's very easy to cast it. Turn 4. And even in the Pioneer format, this is going to be a house.
Yeah, Angrass Marauders might be a little bit more flashy and maybe like a slightly faster clock, but this thing is way more castable. And I think in those instances where you are casting it, it has a much bigger impact on the game too.
Agree with you. And Rangers class, I mean, again, so many pieces here are just so perfect. We have your 31 creature deck, way to reload very easily. You get paid and get more human hits. I mean, the hits are perfect throughout. You get really meaningful stuff. I like this one of Duskwatch Recruiter too. I don't know that I've seen a ton of that card floating around, but that seems like a smart addition to me. And yeah, I continue to be impressed every time I see this deck.
Yeah, I think it's good. It's hard for me to justify playing it when there are some other decks in the format that I'm like way more likely to gravitate towards, but I definitely respect it.
That's smart. You don't want to leave home without respecting this deck. I would put it very high up on the list of public enemies right now.
Same. Next deck, Daleon 91, Boros Burn. To give you an idea of what we're working with in Pioneer, 4 Eidolon of the Great Revel, 4 Gitu Lava Runner, Monastery Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage, 2 Viashino Pyromancer, 1 Zergo Bell Striker, and I don't know, play with fire, Boros Charm, Lightning Strike, Skewer the Critics, Wizard's Lightning, a couple Spike Field Hazards. Pretty normal stuff. The creature base looks like you come up just short, so you have to kind of play some stinkers, but overall, deck is pretty powerful.
Yeah, the stinkers get a lot better when they're being rebought by Loris, and that angle shouldn't be slept on. I have played against this deck probably more than any other because this was my wife's deck when she was learning Magic and playing Pioneer. She was a Boros Burn player for the most part until she found Mono Green Devotion, which she loved even more. But it just plays from positions of like seemingly dead, and then, oh no, actually, I'm the one who's dead. It's very, very good at finding the reach. And if you're expecting Pioneer to be more like Standard, you will be shocked at how often this is just like, all right, 8 you on your turn, the game's over. And that's really tough to adjust to. It makes every single plink from a Soulscar Mage and every single Eidolon of the Great Revel trigger, they add up so hard because you do have the efficiency of a spell like Boros Charm and even Wizard's Lightning. I think being able to reach back to that 1 mana red burn spell, really good.
Yeah, solid deck. Would be more willing to have some amount of like life gain type of stuff just because of the presence of this and how popular it is and how kind of like level 0 easy to play it is, or easy to pick up too. And between this and like the 8 elf Winota deck, it's like you kind of want to be playing a shock in this format, like a shock or a fatal push.
Oh yeah, 1 mana removal is critical for this format. And so, some of the decks I don't love, it is almost entirely on the back of that problem.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. Next deck from Garmon Bozia. Ooh, only 60 cards. Niv-Mizzet Reborn. Yeah, keeping it tight. Niv-Mizzet Reborn, 3 Omnath Locus of Creation, Bring to Light, Sylvan Caryatid to ramp into them, a bunch of gold removal spells, a Celestis for Spice, because why not?
Okay, so here's another deck, I think, in the Pioneer space that people just love. I think they love to cast Niv-Mizzet.
Have you ever cast Niv-Mizzet?
Oh, I have. Actually, in the Brawl for All, if you recall.
I don't. That was a million years ago.
I was a Niv-Mizzet main. I think the only match I won from you in the Brawl for All before we just canceled it without any warning was with Niv-Mizzet. So I've cast it before. Extremely powerful, but this deck, this has the problem. This is the deck that doesn't have the cheap interaction, so you need the format to be about some stuff. And if the format is about that stuff, I think Niv-Mizzet is a great choice. There's a lot of people who I feel try to make it like square peg round hole type stuff where they're always trying to Niv-Mizzet. I don't think that's the role of this deck in Pioneer. I think you're supposed to pick your spots, find out when the metagame is good for Niv-Mizzet, and then it's extremely powerful at what it does, but some real holes.
Agreed. It is fancy though.
Very fancy, a lot of gold cards. I love seeing Blood Baron of Viscopa in the side, but there's just like some classics here, some old favorites you don't get to see all that often.
Oh, I guess it's Gigantha, so that's why it's 60. No Yorion.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Batutina, legendary Magic Online grinder, playing my favorite deck. Arclight Phoenix, Thing in the Ice, some expressive iterations, some pieces of the puzzle, Consider, Ops, Lightning Axe, a couple different shock variants, Galvanic Iteration, 2 Temporal Trespass, 2 Treasure Cruise, and rounding it out with some Chart of Courses.
Yeah, that's the big move in recent times, is the move towards Temporal Trespass plus Galvanic Iteration. My Phoenix experience in Pioneer predates this technology. What do you think about it, Gerald? Are you into this setup, or do you miss the dig through time, more Treasure Cruise stuff that we used to do here?
I want to know the count of how many games were lost directly as a result of you having a trespass instead of a cruise. Just like of all Pioneer players ever. Like, obviously the trespass iteration thing is powerful, and especially when you're setting it up on a turn where you're returning like 2 or 3 Arclights is huge, or maybe like transforming your Thing in the Ice or whatever. But like the games where you are getting interacted with, that setup just seems so much worse to me than playing Cruise. And I'm also skeptical of the notion that like you need that setup to beat anyone. compared to doing what you normally do. But that could be inexperience talking. So I'm sure when I actually get to the format and play some games, I'll be able to figure that stuff out.
Here's the thing that appeals to me about actually doing this with the temporal trespass stuff is I think galvanic iteration might just be good. Like I think you might be very happy playing this for the reasons we're talking about. Again, like you just have to interact quickly. Being able to make 2 removal spells on your 3rd turn will come up a bunch.
Yep.
It'll be really important against the more aggressive decks. I am curious what you can do just playing galvanic iteration and like temporal trespass. Like maybe you don't have to go this hard and you could still play more treasure cruise because really nice combination with treasure cruise. Like drawing 6 is probably going to get the job done just as many times. So if galvanic iteration is just a real card, maybe we can get away from the temporal trespass stuff and just, be a little bit more streamlined, keep things working the way they did previously. I think you also, by having more of the delve stuff, so more treasure cruise, more dig through time and limited numbers, I think your sideboarded games become much better, where I expect sideboarded games with this deck will be a little bit worse. Now, maybe the addition of Hullbreaker Horror plans cover that a little bit. Again, that's something new in my time since I've spent time around this Pioneer Phoenix deck. So I'm curious how that changes things. But on the whole, I agree with you. I think the treasure cruises are kind of indispensable, but I don't hate the iterations. So I want to sort of find a middle ground, I think.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I think playing 1 trespass, if iteration is good enough on its own, just so you can dig for it in a situation where maybe you do need to find it or whatever. I think that's fine. It's just like making it a core part of your game plan. I see how that's powerful. I just don't know that it actually translates to you winning more matches.
That's a great point too, is you do see so much of your deck with the Phoenix decks. So
you see so much that you get decked in some post-board games, which is why they're playing Jace Wielder of Mysteries in the side.
Correct. And that being the case, if you need to set up that temporal trespass turn, play 1 and 1, play 1 iteration, 1 trespass, and still max your treasure cruises out. And I sort of like that setup a little bit more.
Yeah. Next deck is from Jareffi. We got some Soulscar Mages, Monastery Swisspears, Favored Hoplites, 3 Dreadhorde Arcanists, 3 10th District Legionnaire, and then a lot of cards that are not very playable that target your creatures.
Yeah, but when you do them in this context, they sort of work. Deck very explosive. Here's our Dreadhorde Arcanist deck showing up, doing some stuff, getting to cast Boros Charm from the graveyard, which is very cool. But this is just this is one of those things that can only exist when the card pool gets a little bigger, right? Because there's going to be redundancy in these 1 mana effects. So we're dealing with Ancestral Anger, which I think is maybe just a good card. There's a home for this somewhere, and not only in these Bizarro decks. This should see more play.
Yeah, it's very solid.
Yeah, and you combine that with our Girds. We have our Reckless Rages for removal. It's a little odd we got away from Feather, but also we were handed Loris of the Dream Den. So there's a good incentive to go that way. And I think this is the deck that you want to dismiss, and then you play against it, and it does some absurdly powerful things sometimes. How it lines up with the rest of the format, it's a little weird, because I do think you are incentivized to do things like we're talking about, 1 mana removal spells, things like iteration into your 1 mana removal spell. So you're sort of forced as what do you call the featherless versions of this? The red-white Arcanist player to lean on your God's Willing very hard, and you just don't have that many. So it's tough. I guess you have Boros Charm too for Indestructible, but 2 mana is a billion in this deck. So
yeah, there's 8 prowess creatures and 7 heroic creatures, but hold on. I guess 10th District is fake heroic.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. To me, it's a heroic deck. It's not just prowess, because to me, that sounds like you're just casting spells. And this deck is very much I have to cast spells that target my creatures. So I would just call this a heroic deck, but
okay, that works.
Whatever. You could convince me that the correct build of this deck, even if you didn't have Luris, would be with no feathers and just being super lean. Okay. So I don't mind to see, Luris instead of Feather. And I think that Luris probably plays really well with what this deck is trying to do. I have, some Feather experience, a lot of heroic experience. Yep. And I can totally see the games play out where you play against the person, the big jerk like me who has a bunch of shocks and whatever lightning axes in their deck, and you just like run out of gas, and then Luris just gets you to double reload, or like you get to play Luris with the God's Willing up or something, and just run away from the game with it. So this setup looks good to me.
Do you think there's a possibility that Feather is a sideboard card in this deck?
Is there a matchup where you would want Feather where then you would, lose Luris, right? Like
that's what I'm trying. I mean, matchups where essentially you have to play the control role. So like you're trying to be the removal deck against, I don't know, Green Devotion is something that springs to mind, although not widely played at this point.
You don't even have a ton of removal though. It's just Reckless Rage.
Reckless Rage, yeah. But when you have Feather, that's all you need, right? Like you can then control a battlefield.
Yeah, you just have to like rage them early too. I guess like the Feather Arcanist interaction is still good, right?
Yep.
So yeah, maybe that is the way to do it if you needed that. But even then, I feel like you could just sideboard a couple extra removal spells and still be fine.
Sure. Yeah, I think I like the idea of, just because it's something that doesn't get done a lot, like having companions in some games and not other games. It's very rare that people take that approach. And part of it is just because the companions are absurd, right? So I get it. I do think it's somewhat unexplored territory, though.
Yeah, for sure. It's rare to have a situation where like you need a creature in your sideboard so badly that your Kahira is turned off or whatever. Normally you can just get by with whatever the companion is telling you to do anyway. It's not really much of a drawback.
No, fair.
Next deck is another Boros deck from Gustavo Garcia. This one is way different. It is kind of a burn deck, but also has 4 Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and 4 Bone Crusher Giant. Also has 4 Spark Trooper and 2 Ajani Caller of the Pride.
So this is just like a mirror breaker, right? Like this is designed to beat up all the other red decks, I would assume.
So I kind of think not. Like Spark Trooper for connects is great, but the burn decks also just have a ton of cards that just kill creatures, right? So if they just ever have mana open, your thing's probably never connecting. To me,
so what do we want the Spark Trooper for then?
To me, this is a deck that is getting more mileage out of each of its cards. Like if you play the deck with a bunch of lightning bolts against a deck with a bunch of life gain, you're just going to get ground out. Whereas this deck is like hitting harder with each individual thing that you're doing. So I think about like the Niv decks or like any sort of Omnath deck, anything with a bunch of life gain. This might be a burn deck that is a little bit stronger in those scenarios.
It's just so odd to me that Spark Trooper would be the choice then. Like I buy it for the vast majority of the rest of the setup, but it seems so weird that Spark Trooper is the answer.
It is weird. I definitely agree with that. I'm just trying to get inside the mind of the deck builder, and because you don't just like add Spark Trooper to your deck on a whim, right?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like some portion of it is like a Johnny Caller of the Pride into Spark Trooper, which, yes, bravo, that looks awesome, big swing. But I mean, how often are you really doing that?
I don't know, 5 times. They 5-0'd, so.
Okay, 5 times. That's all you have to do it, I guess.
10 times? I don't know. Maybe you don't need it every match, but probably once a match.
Yeah. Okay.
Next deck, Citizen of Nerdvana. Collected Company, Temur with Stubborn Denial, and a couple spicy cards. 1 Crater's Claws, 1 Embercleave, 1 Temur Charm.
How are you going to do Big Knucks dirty like that? Savage Knuckleblade in this list and you don't want to mention it? This card was so hyped when it was about to hit standard and did 0. Just a total failure.
I could talk about this for hours, having been on the Cons dev team.
And where did you see this card as how important did you believe this card would be in standard?
Well, at various points, Temur was our best deck, and then some of the cards got nerfed, and a lot of the other cards got buffed. And then Temur ended up not being the best deck, and we knew that, and we figured that it would like show up here and there, because of the stuff that it's capable of doing. A lot of it was like, is Stubborn Denial going to be good in the format? Because it was very much like this kind of like tempo-y burn deck.
Yep.
And it turns out that even if you wanted to be a tempo-y burn deck, you just played Thoughtseize and Siege Rhino anyway.
Yeah, a lot got covered up by Siege Rhino for sure. And this card certainly does not match up well without a large mana investment. So it's clear why it didn't quite pan out. but people were over the moon about this card in preview season. And I always smile a little bit when I see it show up later on in these older formats. And it has occasionally done so.
Yeah. I like going back, I would almost certainly buff Knuckleblade because like once the other things got buffed, it was a pretty solid like last place, I think.
Very interesting. And when you as like someone who worked in the development, I assume you're still keeping up with like the narrative of the community and seeing what people are, how they're reacting. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the excitement was there about this card.
Yeah.
Were you like, I'm sorry, it's not going to work out for you eventually?
No, people thought it was good, and I was like, oh, cool. You know, like we thought it was solid, and a lot of it was just like the package of things surrounding it, right? It's like, you know, are people going to figure out that like Stubborn Denial is actually awesome? And people were not very high on Stubborn Denial, but they're just like, I'm going to play the Knuckleblade regardless. And it's like, all right, hell yeah, do it, you know? But then, you know, everyone just really liked Mantis Rider and Siege Rhino, and for good reason. So
yep,
made sense.
Well, I am very high on Stubborn Denial. I think this type of archetype has been an important part of the format for quite some time, basically since its inception. You remember the start was like blue-green stuff, one of the most important decks, and looked very different in the first iterations. Had Oko, and still, I think there will always be room in this format for big dummies backed up by Stubborn Denial.
Yeah, and some removal spells and like Waste Interact, and this deck also has like the Elves into Goblin Rabblemaster, which is a huge clock.
Yep. Elves into Steel Leaf Champion.
Yeah. Oh man, the Temur charm too. I could talk about the charms a lot.
So what ended up being the most play charm? It was just Abzan charm, right? Was that just, do you think by virtue of its surrounding tools, or do you think that was just above the rest of the charms?
Like the removal spell is good in the deck, and it also wanted like the Read the Bones type of thing. So I think that made sense, where it was like you can just play 4 of this and you don't really get punished, and it wasn't really the case with a lot of the other charms. But like the charms just went through like so many different iterations. It was interesting because it was just like, all right, well now, you know, my deck definitely wants to play like 4 of this charm or whatever. So like maybe it's a little too good, and maybe this ability should be something else, or like, oh, we want this disenchant for this charm or whatever. And you know, there's just like so many moving pieces, and a lot of things changed like very rapidly.
Interesting. This isn't the end for cons in this deck dump. Another con-centric deck coming up, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that one. It's only a few away.
All right, Temporan. Abzan Humans, 4 collected company, 22 land, 34 creatures.
Love making those collected companies hit as often as possible. Creatures are good now. I mean, the mix of humans here, very solid. We've seen this deck do work in the historic space. Same principles, I would say. Certainly different parts, and we don't have the redundancy of our collected company effects that we get in historic now. But still, this is a deck that feels underrepresented at this moment. Like, I think humans is supposed to do more in the format and will be a more important part as time goes on, as it almost certainly has to be as you make more and more humans.
Yeah, deck looks solid to me. I do think that there are kind of some stinkers in here, but you just kind of do what you got to do. And 34 creatures is certainly high. Like, if it wanted to play some spells, it could.
Yeah, get a couple in there. Maybe a cheap removal spell or 2 could be the difference maker. Sunset Revelry in the sideboard, which I think is interesting. It's a bad sign if you have to go that far. If you can't find answers within your human suite to the more aggressive decks, I'm a little concerned about your viability. So maybe that's the missing piece. They just need a good, resilient human to put in the way of the aggressive red creatures.
Well, yeah, the sideboard's kind of weird too, because it's like 2 Sun Gold Sentinel, 3 Seasoned Hollowblade. Like, I feel like you can do better than that.
It certainly seems like it, but I also, if you ask me to name the most viable humans in Pioneer, I would have a very hard time coming up with a good list of them.
Yeah, but you can play some spells, because again, you'll have 34 creatures made. So not all of your sideboard cards have to be creatures.
Disagree, but go on.
All right. Harry 13.
I think some of your land should be creatures too, for what it's worth, but continue.
Fair. All right. Harry 13 with 4 color, Jeskai Ascendancy, Sylvan Awakening combo. And you set up with Sylvan Caryatid, Paradise Druid. You have some cheap cantrips to trigger your Jeskai Ascendancy, consider an opt. card drawing in expressive iteration, treasure cruise to kind of like keep the chain going. Got some Chain to the Rocks for early removal spells. Love the Chain to the Rocks and Triome interaction.
Yep.
And sometimes this deck plays like Omnath and stuff like that. I generally like that, but recognize that there's a time and a place for it. It's not necessarily good in every metagame.
Yeah, I think this may be Dom Harvey's list. Dom just won Pioneer PTQ with Jeskai Ascendancy combo.
I thought his list was different, but I can check.
It's possible.
I
I know one of the things he did was leave the Omnaths at home.
No, he had the 3-drop creature instead of Paradise Druid.
That is correct. Yes. What is that creature even called? I don't remember. I want to say Dauntless Escort, but that's not it.
No, that's not it. That is 1 G-dub 3/3 sack. All your things get indestructible.
Yeah. For Shards of Alara?
Yeah. I'm on it. Kazandu. Faeburo Elder.
Thank you. Faeburo Elder. Any other differences while you have the deck open?
Portable Hole instead of
I
Chain
like
to the
that.
Rocks.
Yeah, I like Portable Hole.
1 Tamio, 4th copy of Sylvan Awakening in Dom's list also.
Okay. Yeah, so regardless of the specifics, I think Jeskai Ascendancy has been floating around this format for a long time. I'm pretty sure people were like concerned about it at one point, or maybe I'm dating myself and I'm going back as far as Modern, where people were concerned about Jeskai Ascendancy. Was that a real Modern deck for a while?
I don't hear too much about like the Pioneer chatter, but when this deck popped up, I definitely tuned into some streams at some point, and it was like, if people were concerned about it would have shocked me, because there were just games where it was like so clunky and didn't do anything and like easily got ran over. It's like, I find it hard to believe that this deck would cause concern at any point.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe I'm going back to the Modern format, but what do you think about the state that the deck is in now? I mean, I love the idea of playing a combo deck with these 8 blue cantrips. And again, redundancy rears its head in the Pioneer format. When the card pool gets large, you'll often be able to get multiple copies of the same effect. And we see it with Elvish Mystic Llanowar Elves all the time. 8 blue 1 mana filtering things is the kind of setup that I think a bunch of decks are going to start being built around now that we have access to consider.
Dude, you don't have to do too much work to convince me I should play Consider, Opt, and Treasure Cruise. And expressive iteration for funsies.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of glue there.
The rest of this deck, I could take or leave. I don't really care what's in the rest of it.
So we sold you on 16 of the cards, and then you can slot pretty much anything you want around them, and your deck will probably be decent.
Probably. But this setup is still good because, Ascendancy enchantments are difficult to interact with and is not a card type that people are like overly hating in their sideboards. Plus, if you do overly hate on the Jeskai Ascendancy stuff, you could just get ground out by like some
Omnath.
spot removal or card drawing or Omnath or whatever. Yeah. So this setup is pretty good. I do think that it's maybe a little bit too slow, a little bit too clunky for Pioneer, at least to be like, top tier, but is a solid deck and definitely fun as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. I said in the beginning of the show, like, you're going to see all types of decks, and I've often come out against like combos, and that maybe makes it seem like I'm anti-combo in the game. That's not true at all. I just think there has to be like a burden on a combo. It should be challenging to execute a combo. There should be points of interaction for combos. This deck does all of those things, presents all of those things, and I think that its existence in the format is a huge net positive. The fact that there's combo, there's control, aggro, all the different forms of Magic are here, and I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Jeskai Ascendancy in general is not a great ambassador for the types of combo decks that should exist. And I think a lot of the same could be said for like the Lotus Field combo decks, where it's just like you take a 10-minute turn and that's kind of bullshit. But compare that to like Emergent Ultimatum or whatever the ultimatum was, the Sultai Ultimatum in Standard, where it's like that's basically a combo deck, but it's like a 1-card I win. It's like I like the gameplay against that better, even if like, that deck's card was maybe like a mana too cheap and was like a little oppressive or whatever. I generally like those combo decks better.
I agree in terms of like the actual process of winning the game. I prefer things work that way. In terms of points of interaction, though, I have to give it to Jeskai Ascendancy, because they have to basically have their thing on the battlefield. And granted, like, they use Sylvan Caryatid a lot of the time, so it's hexproof. It's difficult to interact with, but you can if you want to work hard at it.
Right. I played Self-Inflicted Wound in like my
Sure.
mono black aggro deck sideboard.
Yep. And then Jeskai Ascendancy itself is interact with a bowl. And I just think there's multiple points of failure, and that's the way a combo deck should be presented.
Yeah, I guess it should be noted too that like this one isn't necessarily that bad because you have Sylvan Awakening for like a clean kill. So
True.
it's not as bad as the Lotus Field deck, and Lotus Field itself is tough to interact with. So overall, like definitely more points for Jeskai Ascendancy existing than Lotus Field.
With you.
All right, next up, Oddly Uneven, another Humans Collected Company deck. This one is just green and white, although the same kind of setup, 23 land, 4 Collected Company, 33 creatures.
Yeah, and I guess like the draw is Mutavault. Do we have Mutavaults in our other list? I'd assume no.
No, because they're
not.
doing like Bloodsoaked Champion, Kitesail Freebooter, General Kudrow stuff.
In the dark, I think I'll take the Mutavaults.
Yeah,
I think that's worth it. So I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with these lists. I could be wrong, but just if you ask my snap opinion, I'm going Mutavault.
Well, I mean, even look at this deck, right? It's not playing any bad cards. You're playing Thraben Inspector, an extra copy of Kithian, some Giant Killers. I think both decks had Dauntless Bodyguard. This one has like a third Adeline instead of Kudrow. It's just like this deck it still just like looks good, and you get Mutavault on top of it. So I don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah, if I'm stretching to black, there's got to be some very specific things I'm hoping to accomplish with it, and I didn't quite see them. So,
yeah, maybe if that deck wanted Thoughtseize in the sideboard or something, like it was like, oh, I need this point of interaction against the combo decks because I only have Thalia or what. Like, okay, cool, I get that.
Yeah.
Solid deck. Silas Bellerin, Dimir Control, 4 Narset, 3 Shark Typhoon, 1 Hullbreaker Horror, a bunch of like counter spells and removal spells, and some card drawing. A main deck Grafdigger's Cage. In Historic, I generally like the idea of that. I'm less sold on it in Pioneer because it still doesn't solve like the Treasure Cruise issue.
Right. So quite familiar with this deck. My brother actually played Blue-Black Control into the top 8 of a showcase a few weeks ago, and I watched most of his top 8, and the deck is just heinous until you cast Dig Through Time, and then it answers a bunch of your problems. So if this deck is going to be a big player, I wish it was better at setting up Dig Through Time, at casting it reliably, at converting that into better positions. It mostly wasn't when I was watching it. This was like just after Hullbreaker Horror came out, and he actually wasn't playing any copies. And one of the first things I said was, you need Hullbreaker Horror. It seems like a big difference maker. So having just even that one in the setup is appealing to me. But this deck has a hard time justifying itself unless its Dig Through Times are very good. And I don't think this is there yet.
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but like, have you looked at this deck's mana base?
No.
It is fascinating.
Well, now I have to look at it.
I don't know, just like yes or no, you agree with me. That's all I'm looking for.
I agree. There are 3 Clearwater Pathway, 3 Drowned Catacomb, 3 Fable Passage, 2 Field of Ruin, a Gyre Reach Sanitarium, 1 Hive of the Eye Tyrant, 3 Island, 2 Shipwreck Marsh, 2 Swamp, 4 Watery Grave, and a Blast Zone.
So like there's a lot of push-pull with like Watery Grave, basics, Drowned Catacomb. Yeah. But there's also like a lot of different dual lands. There's 4, I guess, if you count the creature land, 4 different utility lands. And it's just like, I don't even know how I would build this mana base.
Nope. And I don't know if this version is brilliant or garbage. I have no idea.
Yeah. 3 Drowned Catacomb, 2 Shipwreck Marsh. Is that correct? So the thing that made me initially look at the mana base was 2 Shipwreck Marsh caught my eye. And I was like, that seems like a weird number for like a control deck. But like, I guess, if you're trying to interact in the first couple turns, you want your mana to all ETB untapped. Like, I get that. But it just seems like the best land going long. And Drowned Catacombs is like maybe slightly better because you can, in theory, play it untapped on turn 2. But like, if that's the case, when you want like 4 and only 1 more,
Yep.
It's just, it's wild.
I don't know where I would settle on this one.
And 2-color deck with only 3 pathways. It's like, I mean, I guess you need Fable Passages and whatever to facilitate the Drowned Catacombs.
You need your slots, and you need enough basics for Field of Ruin and the Fable Passage. So I mean, it's just like so many things to consider. 2
Graveyard Trespasser in the sideboard, so I hate it.
Okay, now you're off it.
Next deck.
You're on board with the deck until then.
No, I still wasn't on board with the deck. Next deck is from Wakasama Mono Red. Bone Crusher Giant, Cemetery Gatekeeper, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Goblin Chain Whirler, Monastery Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, Play with Fire, Lightning Strike, Chandra, Torch of Defiance, 23 land, and a Chandra Dress to Kill. I love Chandra Dress to Kill, and there's so many 1-drops. Play more of it.
Card seems good here. A lot of damage pulled out of your mana base here. And I think that's the draw with just going hard red. So if you're playing against a bunch of, like pure control, I think this is a really nice place to be. And you have some longevity too with the addition of the multiple Chandras. So a fine take on red. I have no objections to it.
Yeah, I love like a medium red deck, like the Hazoret style red decks where you're definitely an aggro deck in most matchups, but then you play against a creature deck and you're like, well, I'm gonna like, stomp your thing and chain whirler you and like planeswalker you and
find those 2-for-1s and make it happen.
Yeah, so I love this take. I wonder how good Cemetery Gatekeeper is in general, because it seems like a card that could be fine in a lot of formats, and there's like a little bit more graveyard interaction, or like, people trying to do stuff with their graveyard in Pioneer, just like in a light way. Like you pointed out the Trespasser nabbing an Arclight Phoenix, for example. Like that, this card can obviously do that too. So it seems like it could be good, and then maybe also beat up on the Ascendancy decks a little.
Yeah, I think that's what's motivating a lot of this behavior is just Phoenix and people wanting to account for it. So one way to do it, for sure.
Saitama, Azorius Control, 26 land. Win conditions are 3 Shark Typhoon, 3 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria if you hate yourself. Has a couple Narsets, 1 Search for Iskanta, Commit to Memory, 1 Dig Through Time, 2 Memory Deluge for card drawing, Consider to fuel the Delve stuff, Supreme Verdict, Portable Hole, normal stuff.
Yeah, nothing too flashy here. Just wisely included double Castle Vantris. So that should deal with any problems.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so 2 Castle Ardenvale for win conditions, too, if you hate yourself slightly less than the Teferi.
Yeah. This deck is fine.
How do you take a mana base that's like obviously very similar to the Dimir one, right? Where you're like, ooh, I got to balance all these fancy lands, and then you're just like Castle Vantris and get.
I don't know, but that's what we're doing here, and I wonder how often it matters. Probably not all that often, but we have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, you see, so we can untap the Castle Vantris.
Dude, shut up.
I think that might be the first shut up I've earned from you on this podcast. After all of my badgering, finally, this was what broke you.
And I mean, it's like maybe not the 10th time on the podcast, but it's definitely like the 10th time you've said that shit to me. And I'm sick of it.
All right, I understand. There's only so much I can push on you before you just finally snap.
This deck also has a Kahira.
Yeah.
Wait.
If you can do it.
Dude, you found it. Okay, so this deck has 2 Dream Trawlers.
Dream Trawler. Yeah, nice.
Right?
So this person is doing the thing where if they want the Dream Trawler, they give up on the Kahira.
Yeah. All right, who cares? Next deck. Fatted. Or That Ted. I guess that makes more sense. Jund, Food, some Mayhem Devils, some Corvolds, Trail of Crumbs, 2 Bolus of Citadel, so not a ton of that. 4 Deadly Disputes.
Love everything about it.
Hate everything about it.
Okay, tell me why.
This deck is just 2 years old at this point.
But it doesn't matter. It's still absurd. And like it still interacts very well. It's still, I guess its one flaw is like I don't think it does very well with the combo that exists in Pioneer. And Pioneer is a format that has some more pure combo than most. So that's troubling. But when the format is about creatures, how could you do better than this? Very
easily. Play the big mono red deck.
No, you can't tell me that big mono red outpaces the Mayhem Devil Cauldron Familiar Witch's Oven deck. I mean, it's just a combination known to completely blunt creatures and their effect on the game.
Yeah, on turn 4. We've already established that you need to interact before that. Yes, this deck has 4 Fatal Push. Yes, but that is it. And then the rest of the game is like you trying to set up to a point where maybe you can stabilize, and you're just leaning on Mayhem Devil, but also having everything else set up with. It's just too much, man.
You know what's funny is I actually had this revelation while I was playing Teamfight Tactics the other day, because I play that game the exact same way I play Magic. I have no interest in micromanaging things and like eking out tiny percentage points and just like making these split-second decisions to get this last little bit of equity. I want to assemble something that outscales anything my opponent can do and completely control the game from that point. And I will figure out perfection in the turns leading up to assembling my thing, because I know at that point my thing takes over. And I sort of play Teamfight Tactics the exact same way, where I don't want to deal with all the micro stuff. I just want to crush my opponent so badly that there's nothing they can do because I did the early thing so well.
And
this deck does that.
That's fine when we're talking about standard and everything is a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of Pioneer, that's not true.
Man, I'll just slap some Thoughtseize in the main deck. I'll interact a little more and we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
we'll
that's
figure
fine.
It out as we go.
It is worth noting that this deck only has 2 Thoughtseize in the sideboard. They have 4 Go Blank instead.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, Go Blank, again, an important card in the format. But if this were me, because of the style I play, I would have more Thoughtseize.
Word. Vi K-Cola.
Beautiful.
Vampires. Orzhov variety. 4 Thoughtseize, 3 Fatal Push. 6 Sorens. So many Sorens. 4 Imperious Bloodlord. 2 Mirthless. 22 vampire creatures. We now have Edgar Charmed Groom as a non-embarrassing thing to put in with Imperious Bloodlord. So that's cool. Also just like a fine card. And yeah, I don't know. Dusk Legion Zealot, Knight of the Ebon Legion, Gifted Aetherborn. It's like good setup stuff. I like this deck.
Yeah, I've been lower on Edgar in like the standard realm where people just use it as a value card. But as a lord and as a creature that can benefit from like all the stuff you have going on in the vampire deck, I really like it. I think it's a big get here. And Vampire's not having its best days as of late. I don't know if Edgar's enough to sort of revitalize the archetype, but I like a lot of what's going on here. We also have a Voldaren estate in the mana base now, so you get a little bit of extra filtering, which you will certainly be able to turn on, again, in your hard Vampires deck. So maybe some subtle pickups for the Pioneer format with our most recent trip to Innistrad. And maybe it's time for Vampires to get back in the mix.
Well, I will say that similarly to the Jund food decks, it's possible that the format has kind of passed it by, but you do get to like play Thoughtseize and Fatal Push and are relatively happy about it. So
yep. And Sorin remains a hell of a Magic card.
Yes.
Like that's not going to change at any point.
That's
so
definitely
true
true
too.
too.
A good setup around that.
It's one of the few sources of like potential life gain that you can use too.
Yeah, very true.
Next deck, Settling, Lotus Field combo. 2 Emergent Ultimatums, so we get like the best of both worlds, hidden strings, all that jazz.
So I don't have a lot to say about any specifics here. Just what do you think about this particular version of combo existing in the format? Do you view it as a net positive, net negative? Let's put aside the long length of turn for the time being. I know that's an important part of the
yeah,
equation.
I mean that's part of it, man. I don't know if you can.
No, so here's the thing. I think this is like a showpiece for weird things that Magic can do. And this goes back to like, this should be the intro format, because Magic's appeal is very different to many people. And being able to do this type of weird mathy stuff, I think is really, really important. I think about, again, I'm going to talk about another game, my experience with the game Monster Train. If you haven't played Monster Train, really great Slay the Spire-esque type game. I was obsessed with it for a brief period. Haven't played it much in a long time, but in a moment, I was all about that game. And I realized at that moment, the thing that really sold me on it was when I was able to put together things that just spiraled out of control in terms of their scope and really strong combo things that don't make a lot of sense abstractly with the way the game is typically played. That was exciting to me. So I think all Magic should have some form of that. I don't think it should often be the very best thing. And I think, like I said, I want points of interactability, but to me, Lotus Field is sort of flirting right on the edge of something I want in the game and something I don't.
If the option was this or nothing like it, I would take this.
Okay.
We do have things like Alpine Moon to interact. You can also like fight the graveyard or fight them with like Campbell's and Thalias and stuff like that. Like there's interaction. It's just light. You really have to kind of like work for it, you know? So it's not that bad. I do think it's kind of miserable, but it's not like eggs miserable. I think the game is over much sooner than that. And I don't know, like cards like Peer into the Abyss certainly made that more palatable, where it's more likely like the game just ends. So it's getting to a better place. And I agree that something like this should exist. I just think that like Ascendancy is probably like a healthier version of it, or this would be fine if there was a little bit more, maybe like non-basic land hate or something.
Yeah. The other point I'll make is that this deck, your kills become deterministic pretty quickly. So it's just a question of like knowledge.
Yeah, like does your opponent know that?
Yes, that is the problem with it. So at a high level, I think this is probably a fine inclusion. As things get to more like, if this is the F&M format, it becomes more problematic.
Correct. Next deck, Season Herb, 19 snow-covered islands, 3 faceless havens, 4 curious obsessions, 7 random counterspells, and 27 spirits.
I think this is cool. I will not put in a vote about how good it is. I like that it's something you can do. And I've seen a bunch of spirits floating around the Pioneer format. And the more traditional spirits list isn't represented in this deck dump, but it was extremely popular at SCGCon a few months ago when they had the Pioneer PTQ. A lot of people playing that deck, and it looks solid. But something like this is cool for the fact that it's unlike any other deck. Again, a really nice exploration of how many things are possible in the Pioneer format. I just appreciate that you can do this stuff.
Same. I think this is cool. I appreciate, like, what's the word where you just kind of like go back to basics or whatever. It's like you could play the fancy like band version or whatever, but this one is this one's not even necessarily like streamlined or whatever, right? But it's just like simpler, and I appreciate that.
I stopped listening because I'm just like sitting here trying to think of the perfect word to sum up the back to basics approach, and it's not coming to me. So you've ruined my participation for the rest of the podcast as I try and come up with this.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right?
I do. There's like a word that means it, and everyone listening is just sitting in their car screaming it at their car stereo right now.
It's like watching a game show or whatever, and it's just like, it's that, you idiot.
An easily solvable Wheel of Fortune puzzle is what we have
now.
But yeah, we'll just move on to the next deck.
Final deck, LAA11. I'm not convinced that this deck is anywhere remotely playable, but it's cool as hell. Rakdos, Deadly Dispute, Fatal Push, Claim Fame, Thoughtseize, 4 copies of Archfiend's Vessel, Blood Tithe Harvester, Voldaren Epicure, Crocs the Titan of Death's Hunger, and some other crap. But like this setup for Rakdos, where you're claim faming like Blood Tithe Harvester, that was kind of the card I was looking for in the other version, where it's like, oh yeah, I guess you could use that with claim fame as like your removal spell, and that would be kind of cool. And you have claim fame for the vessel. This one plays Epicure to maybe like scale up the harvesters a little bit more. There's also a copy of Fiery Temper that you can get frisky with off of your blood token, which you love to see.
Yeah, and a little bit of reach too. I mean, I wouldn't count that out either. I think just having access to it with your very versatile reanimation spell is going to be a big deal in a lot of spots.
Yeah. I mean, Fame represents some burst damage. Epicure does a little bit of chip. Croxa is obviously like going to do a little bit of chip damage too. So having more reach is definitely helpful. Definitely, maybe not necessary, but it's good.
Very cool approach. I wonder about Deadly Dispute versus Village Rites. Like, do you really make good usage of the treasure token, or do you need to be as absolutely super lean as possible with this deck because you're just not playing good cards? Like, you need to get the max out of absolutely everything you do.
Well, you don't have Dreadhorde Arcanist, so it's not like you necessarily need the 1 mana card. And you could, yeah. And if you do, then probably make that change. But like the thing that I've been thinking about is like, how often is Dispute actually worse than Village Rites? Because it is effectively a 1 mana card, right? Like you get the mana back. So it's just like, are there turns where it's the thing that you do with like your last remaining mana, or does it matter at all? And like this deck has Vessel and Epicure to play on 1, which sets up into Deadly Dispute on turn 2, and then you get to do whatever on turn 3. And like, do you need it? Are you curving into a 4-drop? No, but like it just means that you can double or triple spell, which is cool. And is Deadly Dispute ever going to be worse than Village Rites in this deck? And I guess like Crocs on turn 3 is like a good representation of like when it might be worse.
Yeah, the other point I was coming up with was like Arcfiend's Vessel and your Village Rites on the same turn, so turn 2, assuming like the first one got answered on turn 1. Otherwise, you could just do the same thing with Deadly Dispute. But the assumption is like it shouldn't always survive through the first turn. Although Vessel is a pretty mopey card, really shouldn't draw out your opponent's ire all that often.
Well,
but it curves into claim into fame on turn 3 with that setup.
Yeah. Well, I mean, both of them do, right? If
both of them do, yes. If you go 1-drop, Deadly Dispute, claim fame, you're fine.
Yeah.
I guess you could also just. Well, no, that doesn't quite work. I don't know. I would have to play games with the deck to find spots where it didn't work. But you do like need to go to 4 mana sometimes for your Croxes, and you're a 22 land deck, and you're trying to get a little value out of your mana base with like your Castle Lockdwains, your Den of the Bugbears. So maybe there just are enough homes for that Deadly Dispute mana to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I just look at it like they effectively both cost 1 in a lot of instances. So are there instances where Deadly Dispute does not cost 1, and is it going to mess you up? And Crox is a big one, I think. Or if you are playing against like Flame Blessed Bolt and you want to protect your thing, like, yeah, then it's a little bit more awkward to like try and slow play or Archfiend's Vessel or whatever. But just run it out there, dude. Who cares? It can die.
I agree. You made the decision to play Arcfiend's Vessel in your deck. You're willing to live with some splash damage. Just let it happen.
Yeah, no big deal. You'll find another one or something equally as crappy to sacrifice.
You'll just Luris. It's fine. Everything will come together eventually.
Yeah.
Cool deck, though. I really do think it's very cool.
Yeah, it's cool. It's innovative. It's utilizing some cards that are new also, which you love to see.
Yeah. Again, another huge point in favor of Pioneer. The fact that you can do that in this format it's big. These vampires mattered there. In some instances, more than they mattered in Standard. So,
yeah, I mean, it means that you could potentially like power up the Standard level sets too if you wanted to, if there was no actual Standard.
I agree, and I think that matters, and I think they were kind of doing that anyway, and it sold a bunch of cards, and I don't know. We could do a whole show on why I think it's time for Paper Standard to die, and I would be villainized because a lot of people hate that idea. And
if you look
maybe
at history,
that shows it's a bad idea.
If you look at history, basically like every rotating format has eventually died.
Yeah. There's a reason for that. And when I went and discovered a new game and I was playing Flesh and Blood and their classic constructed format doesn't rotate, I was just like, well, yeah, this makes sense. Thank you. I'm happy for this.
I mean,
I build
when
these decks, they last.
It's good when you have 3 sets, but then like something else has to change. And like,
so I'm not going to get into the specifics of it. Their system is set up in such a way that it naturally changes. Your criticism is fair, but they are well set up to deal with the criticism.
Okay. Also, there are counterpoints for like Hearthstone and Shadowverse and games like that, where it's like they do eventually rotate stuff. And I think it's, I don't know, like it's basically like their only offering, right? So it's not necessarily a good counterexample to Magic and why those formats have failed, because Magic has eventually had more sets and more like wider card pools and different things to offer, whereas like a burgeoning game may not have that.
Very true. I think this is this dichotomy of like Standard has to keep existing, but there's no like real home for competitive play anymore, and there's no Standard circuits and no real reason for it to keep existing. It's another instance of, I think, Wizards kind of talking out of both sides of its mouth at once. And I don't even think it's intentional, but you simultaneously say like, these are not the people that we're trying to sell Magic to anymore. Like, we are trying to take advantage of this player base. The more casual goes to F&M once in a while, plays a bunch of Commander. I don't think it's at all a coincidence that Commander seized upon that market because it's a non-rotating format and your purchases can matter. And if you really do, if that is really the players you care about, and you see the online space, or even you only see Alchemy as the playground of the most enfranchised, then split it up and serve your player bases and make it clear which of your offerings are for whom. And right now, Standard is trying to serve a lot of masters, and it doesn't do any of them well, in my opinion.
To be fair, though, I think that if they did that right now, it was just like we wake up tomorrow and they're just we
everyone would be outraged.
No,
yes.
Well, yeah, it's a bad idea to do it now. It's like there needs to be different infrastructure in place in order to do that and phase it out. But if you start making steps towards that, you could absolutely do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is more of a long-term vision than like I think it should happen right now. But if, they don't do a lot of things with long-term setup and long-term vision, they just kind of make things happen.
True.
So if they did it at the time of the alchemy announcement, I'm sure there would have been a lot of outrage, and I'm sure we would have adjusted to it. And I think actually Magic would have been better for it had it been done at that point.
Yeah, maybe. I think like Pioneer would have to already be on Arena at that point, I think. Just so that there's like a supported format on Arena that is basically the standard replacement for real life, even though, real life is not super popular right now.
I don't know. But I don't know if that matters anymore.
Yeah, whatever.
I really don't. But nobody knows. Nobody knows. We'll all try and figure it out the best we can. I have figured out I like Pioneer. That's the one thing I know for sure. How about a favorite deck, Gerald? Did you have a favorite deck that
Phoenix.
We went through today? Yeah, that's a good choice. That is very much right up your alley. I think for my part, my favorite deck is one that does not exist yet. I think I could find something in the Rakdos space that I would be very happy playing. It would be reminiscent of historic Dreadhorde Arcanist decks. And we see bits and pieces of it, flashes of it in this deck dump. But I think that space is destined to be one of the strong points of this format. And I want to put together, I want to play it. I want everyone to play more Pioneer and enjoy this very cool format.
If you tell me that I can't play Phoenix, I will also be very happy playing a slightly more mid-range creature deck. And, I got second or like scooped the finals in Pioneer PTQ with Mono Black with Smuggler's Copter and,
yep.
Like that sort of style, or the red deck that we talked about that was like Bone Crusher, Chandra. That stuff is tight. I like that.
I agree with you. Lots of love in this format. Just not Graveyard Trespasser.
No.
Nobody loves that card.
Game.
Good luck.